Hello and welcome. This is Cheryl. I'm so glad you've joined me today. In this video, I'm going to show you how to take this cute little Harvey die that has just come out and turn him into a little shaker tag. Now, there's so many different options that you can do with this die. There's lots of different additions, different ways you can dress him up. I kept it really simple. I actually eliminated some of the steps so that you could incorporate the shaker in his hat as well as his belly. So I've already got the base of the shaker cut, and I'm going to cut the openings, and I just have a square die here that I'm going to tape into place so it doesn't shift while I'm running it through my machine. And I'm going to cut a little square out of his hat as well as out of his belly. Now this little base piece is actually supposed to be cut out of a flesh color, and then you layer all the suit pieces on top of it. Because I'm eliminating those layers, I chose to cut them out of red. So some of the pieces that are supposed to be flesh colored are actually going to be red, and that's his little hands as well as his ears and his chin. But you don't really notice it until it's pointed out. If you wanted to do him in the colors that he's supposed to be according to the back of the dies, you could, and then you could either use marker to color the different pieces to the colors that you want them to be, or you could add the extra layers and then cut the squares out of those layers to reveal the shaker. You just have to match those different layers. So now I've got my openings here. I'm just putting a little piece of acetate in here. This is a great use for scraps, and this entire project is actually a really great use of scraps. A lot of the little pieces to go on him are really tiny, so it's a perfect way to go through your little bits and pieces and use some of them up and have fun along the way. So I'm just using some Distress Collage medium to glue that little piece of acetate in place. You could also use a double-sided tape. This doesn't need to look perfect. This is going to be completely enclosed in the shaker mechanism, so you're just covering the back of it, and it just needs to make sure that you cover the window and it doesn't go past the outside of the die cut. Once your acetate is in place, you need to set it aside to dry completely before we move on. I like to put a little acrylic block on top of it to help with that. Now, what I didn't show at the beginning is he's actually a little tag that you can open up and write a little message inside. So there's a little way that you can do this with a die, and you can do this with a lot of different dies, and I'm showing you right here. So you're going to take your die, and one of the blade edges that would normally cut, you're going to put a fold there, but you're going to put the cardstock just slightly in from that so that it doesn't actually cut there. It'll cut all of the rest of your shape, but it will leave that fold there intact, so you can use that as a little note card. So it's just a fun way to create a note card that is shaped as well as functional. So my glue has now dried on the front of the shaker card, and what I'm going to do for his hat is I'm just taking a Copic marker and I'm coloring the red cardstock black so that he does have a hat. Like I said before, if you wanted to, you could cut the piece out of black cardstock and then just match your openings for the shaker. This is just a super easy way to get a piece a different color without having to cut another piece of cardstock. I'm using a Copic marker. You could use a black Sharpie, you could use a Tombow marker. It doesn't really matter what marker you're using, but it's just a great way to get a different color without cutting extra pieces of cardstock. Now obviously I wouldn't be able to color something lighter than the red. It only works to color things darker, so just keep that in mind. So I have some thin foam strips here, and I'm just putting them on the outside of the shaker parts of the card. You want to make sure that you don't see any of the foam within the shaker window, and you also don't want to see it past the outside of the die. So any bits, if they happen to be past that, you're going to need to cut them off. This particular square die in the little Harvey body was perfect. It allowed exact amount of space that was needed for that thin foam strip. You want to make sure that all of your joins are butted up right together so that no shaker pieces can fall out once you have that all together. Once you have your foam all around the edges, you can take the tape backing off and you can add the little shaker pieces to it. I chose to do mine in red and gold. You can do whatever color you want. Just keep in mind this is a really small area. You don't want anything that's too big that won't actually move around in the window. I like to collect bits and pieces over when I see them. Sometimes it's because I actually like the jar that they're in, and sometimes it's because I like the little bits and pieces that they have. So I always have things on hand, but you can actually get some shaker packages with different mixes and stuff like that now that different companies make, which is really, really cool. I love all the options that are out there. Once I have my shaker pieces in there, I'm taking my little cord loop and I'm going to glue that on top of there so that that is enclosed within the foam tape. And then I'm going to put my little Harvey back onto that front that has the windows. So there we go. We've got our base completely finished. Now I'm just going to layer all the different pieces to create the features for Harvey. So I have his little shoulder pads. I have the little gold strips on the top. All of these pieces are cut out of scrap pieces of cardstock. Most of them are plain cardstock. The little feather thing on his hat is done out of glitter cardstock, but you could easily do them out of scraps of metallic paper, scraps of glossy paper. You could take glossy paper, color them with Copics or alcohol inks, and create some custom papers for this. But it's a great way to use up little bits and pieces and scraps. I like to use the Distress Collage medium simply because if some of the glue squeezes out, it dries completely clear and it also dries matte. So just keep that in mind when you're doing your gluing on top of the window. It does dry matte, so it's going to give it a bit of a different finish than the actual acetate, so you do have to be careful there. Some of those pieces are super, super tiny, and you can see for a lot of them I'm using tweezers to help place them. It just helps get them in the area that you want, and then you can press them down with your finger to release from the tweezers. The tweezers also are helpful with just pushing things into place when needed. One of those little tools with the wax tips for picking up gems and stuff like that would also likely be helpful here if you didn't happen to have some tweezers. I happen to have tweezers and I don't have those little sticky tools or whatnot, so this works just fine. You do definitely want to be using something to help you with these really, really tiny pieces, because some of them are really just too tiny to pick up and place with your fingers, as well as trying to get glue on them. You can see how easy it makes it using the tweezers to help place everything. Once you've got all these pieces die cut, it's really quite easy to put everything together. And liquid glue is definitely very helpful because if something gets placed a little bit cockeyed, you can just shift it back into place. Sometimes some of the little pieces will like to curl up with the dampness of the glue, but you just hold it down for a few seconds. So this guy is done. The one thing that I am going to do to give him a little bit of a different texture is I'm going to add some glossy accents to the little gold circle right by his feathers, as well as adding it to his boots. It just adds a different texture to him, which I really, really like. Now, everything that I'm using to put this little guy together, you'll find down in the description box below. It'll be listed down there. I just think this is such a cute way to add just something interactive to a gift. This is the finished guy here. You can see when I put the glossy accents down, it has a milky look to it, but it dries completely clear. And it really makes the little gold circle look almost like a gem. Thank you so much for spending some time with me. I hope you have a fabulous day.